Hi everyone. For my very first Colab 365 vlog, I am going to talk to you today about considerations that you should have when moving SharePoint to the cloud. My name is Nakia Carter. I'm a Microsoft strategist, solutions developer, and trainer, and I have specialties in Office 365, SharePoint, and related tech. I started off my career in applications development, then did a little bit of intranet development thrown in. Then I started into SharePoint in 2009. I became an owner of Carter McGowan Services, and I did that for about 6 years before my company was acquired by C3 Integrated Solutions, where I am now the Director of Collaboration and Training. You can see some of my education and certification here, and I have authored 2 video courses and am a co-author for a book that's about to come out. And you can see some of my roles, including being a technical speaker, running a SharePoint user group, being on the International Association's Microsoft Channel Partners Board, as well as being on another board for Microsoft called Voices for Innovation. C3 is a Microsoft Gold and Silver partner, and we have several specialties. From managed services all the way through the collaborative services like SharePoint, other services like Azure, EMS, and Windows 10 deployments. And you can see some of the value-added partnerships that we have, as well as the customers that we have serviced. So before I really get into this, I really need to give you a disclaimer on the cloud. The technology that we're talking about moving to is Office 365 for SharePoint Online. And this is cloud technology, and it's constantly being updated. So as of May 4th, 2018, the things that I'm going to tell you are what is available for you right now. But later down the line, maybe not so much. Maybe even a few minutes from now, things may change. So please excuse any inconsistencies between this video and things that might happen in the possibly near future. The things that we're going to talk about today are SharePoint on-prem versus SharePoint online, some of the considerations you should have there. You should also think about hybrid and if that is something that you want to do or need to do. Some other things that you want to think about, make sure you have a good understanding of Office 365 and the things that are available to you and what's included. And then there's some security and compliancy concerns, especially for those of us that are federal or state or local government. But even if you're not, if you're a contractor, you still have those compliancy concerns, and you'll still have those security concerns even if you're not in the government. So what's the difference between on-prem SharePoint and online SharePoint? Well, with on-prem SharePoint, you can basically do everything on this screen. You can do out-of-the-box solutions, use SharePoint Designer, use InfoPath, third-party tools. There's server-side and client-side code. And if you're in SharePoint 2013, SharePoint Online, or SharePoint 2016, then you also have the app model available, which is slowly taking over the server-side code environment anyway. In the SharePoint Online environment, because it's a multi-tenancy environment, you have a bunch of options that you can do that are still available to you, but you cannot do server-side code. So you'd have to use the app model in order to do some of those things that you might have wanted to try to do server-side, making certain solutions. But being able to manipulate SharePoint via the server using server-side code is not something you can do, since the environment has multi-tenants in the pod that you might be in for Office 365. So that's a no-no. Now there is still the ability also to do Designer and InfoPath and use third-party tools. The third-party tools, you have to make sure it says that it specifically or will also do SharePoint Online, because if you don't, and you get one for 2013 or 2016, it might not work in your SharePoint Online environment. InfoPath and SharePoint Designer are going away, although they still have a good amount of time on it. I think at this point they still have about 5 or 6 years left in the timeline. But you might want to consider starting to move your things over from InfoPath into Power Apps, which has become a lot more mature. Still not to the InfoPath level quite yet, in some regards, but very, very close. And in some regards, even more powerful than InfoPath because of the data connections that you can do, the different types of data that you can connect to easily. SharePoint Designer, consider switching out for Flow. Again, a little bit of a ways to go there, but where you can, consider switching it out and don't use any of the out-of-box workflow. Microsoft is retiring them. They've been kind of retiring it quietly, and I've noticed that for some of our clients that was using that, we had to switch them over to something else because those workflows are now failing. So any out-of-the-box SharePoint workflows, except for, I would say, content approval, which isn't really a workflow out of the box, but it's still a workflow. I would consider not using them at all, not even as a not even as a base for another workflow that you would use. You might want to consider whether you want to do a lift and shift approach or want to do a rebuild. Now, there are tools that will let you do a lift and shift from SharePoint 2007 on, but I would caution you that sometimes those tools, although it does move your sites, like say for instance ShareGate, which is one of my favorite tools, and AppPoint. But ShareGate I found in particular, although it does move like a SharePoint 2007 environment into a SharePoint Online environment, I've done a few of those, later it bites you a little bit because there are things that are not available in SharePoint 2007 that are available in SharePoint Online and vice versa. So sometimes those things will come back and bite you. Also, some of the feature sets, things that you can do, broken links, there's a lot of things that can end up happening. So I highly suggest, and this is my best practice, instead of doing the lift and shift, also it'll come over looking archaic as well, instead of having the better design aspect of SharePoint Online, I highly recommend doing a rebuild of their environment and then moving the data into that environment. One, because a lot of times the old environment is old. If there's a lot of things in there that shouldn't be moved, there's restructuring that should be done, there's cleanup. So that's your opportunity to have the client, your customer, or if it's your own organization, do that sort of thing before you move into the new environment. The other thing is the things that I talked about, those little hidden things that might seem like it's okay for right now, and then you go until you go back to try to develop something else later, and then you're like, okay, this isn't working quite the way I thought, and now I got to possibly break the whole thing and rebuild it anyway. So it's better to just start off with a fresh rebuild for the purposes of planning your new fresh home and cleanup, but also just so you don't get caught with those details that might be catch you with your pants down a little bit. You might also have some design considerations. So in SharePoint Online, the considerations that you can choose are out of the box, of course, using change the look. You can use different web parts. There's client-side code using jQuery. You can use third-party tools. There's also the Design Manager, and you can still use SharePoint Designer and make modifications to the master page. Although, like always, designing via making changes to the master page is not best practice. You should consider one of the other options. Now, I understand that a lot of those other options don't give you the ability to make SharePoint look less SharePointy, where I kind of disagree with the look of SharePoint being too fancy because SharePoint is there to be a tool, it's not there to be a website. But anyway, I know a lot of people will push back on that. But I would highly suggest, especially in the SharePoint Online environment, that you don't make changes to the master page. It was already taboo before, but it's even worse now because SharePoint Online is constantly being updated via the Office 365 fixes and rollouts and things and patching. And an issue may come up more often where your design breaks, possibly a few minutes after you just put it back together again. And that can be very, very costly. If you want to do something to make your SharePoint look like a website, for example, I would highly suggest using a third-party tool. My favorite is Live Tiles, but there's also Pixel Mill, and I believe there's a few different options in the SharePoint store as well. So what about hybrid? Well, you might want to consider hybrid, but don't consider it just because it's the thing, it's the word everybody's using, and yeah, I want to do that because it's the new cool kid. No, you should highly consider whether you really need to keep any of that data on-prem. Keeping data on premises, first of all, it's expensive. You're getting charged for the heating and cooling of the building, keeping up with those server patches and updates and upgrades, upgrading the hardware altogether, not just patching. There's a lot of different costs to consider. And if you have that environment plus the SharePoint Online environment, you're paying two costs. Now, there are times where you do need to have hybrid. So, for example, if your data is highly sensitive, like you work for a government agency and you need to keep some of that on-prem, or you're just not comfortable with some of it going up to the cloud and you're good with spending that money, then by all means, go ahead and do so. I will let you know that Microsoft has announced that they now have a SIPRNet version of SharePoint Online available, which they'll start rolling out and helping government customers get into. And that's one of the things that C3 can actually help you do as well. So you could move everything into the cloud depending on what kind of customer you are. What can you do in SharePoint Online? Well, SharePoint Online looks really cool. So you can always do what you did before. You can collaborate seamlessly, but now you have these things like the communication sites and the hub sites, which are making it easier for you to pull together different site collections and have a more flat site structure for the hub sites. And the communication sites help you to build um, a pretty awesome page where uh, it looks really good out of the box. It's very picture focused, less words. The orientation is a bit better, and you could start off with that. Or you could just throw up a modern site, a modern page, which are really called site pages. Well, Microsoft and their terminology, right? Because their site pages are all site pages. But anyway, the term for it they use instead of a wiki page or a web part page is a site page. And those are those modern pages you might have heard about that help you give and get some of those looks that you see on the screen, especially the one that's in the laptop. You can gain intelligence and insights, so you have a little bit more data that you can get from the SharePoint homepage. For example, not only seeing the sites that you have been at frequently and those that you've been at recently or have bookmarked with the follow star, but you can see from those sites what activity has been happening on those sites, who has been doing what. And then you can also like click on the name of a person or their face, and you can get their contact card information. More to come there as well. Microsoft is making changes to this environment so that it's a little bit more intelligence and insight, but it basically looks the way it is on the screen right now. There's, of course, enterprise security and compliance that is available in Office 365. Those things have to be turned on though. So don't think just because Office 365 says that it is FedRAMP compliant and certain ones are NIST compliant. For NIST 800-171 or DFARS, I forget the name for that one. It's DFAR something 70. Um, just because it says that it is stamped with that approval doesn't mean that yours is stamped with that approval. There are things that you're going to have to turn on, like information rights management. You're going to want to turn on extra security, possibly in your email, um, things like that. Document retention policies. There's a lot of things that you want to put in place to help your environment become more secure and possibly even more compliant, depending on if you're a government agency or a government contractor. There's a TechNet article here that will give you some of the features that are given to the government agencies. I'll make sure that that is in the notes for this blog so that you're able to get to this TechNet article. So other things that you should know about Office 365. So you really should know about Office 365 in general so that you understand what all it is that you're getting. It's a cloud technology, and its successor was this thing called BPOS, which was pretty horrible. But off of that, Microsoft has made a bunch of different changes and incorporated a lot of lessons learned. And out came Office 365, which was a whole lot better. It's subscription based. If you're a 501c3, a nonprofit, or a accredited educational institution, then you can get it free for E1 and the business essentials, I think it is, or very low cost, like paying 75% off for like the E3 or the E5 or the business. I forgot the other one, the other business one. You can tell I don't do a whole lot of ones for business. I do a lot more enterprise level subscriptions. But anyway, low cost for basically everybody else. It really doesn't cost that much a month, depending on how many users you have and what your budget is, of course. It's accessible from anywhere where you have a not too old device and you have a internet connection. It's secure and it meets a bunch of different compliancy standards. Again, just because it meets those standards as a whole doesn't mean your environment does. So you need to make sure you configure your environment properly. The subscriptions are per month, but you could do per year, and you can mix and match them. You only need one person to be in the subscription, but of course, most organizations are bigger than one person. The things that are included are shown on the screen. Everybody gets a 50 gig Exchange mailbox. Some people, depending on their subscription, will also have things like legal hold available to them, the ability to have unlimited archiving. That unlimited archiving has an asterisk beside it because as the admin, you actually have to allot them more storage in 100 gig increments. It's not you just turn on unlimited archiving and they just have it. So a little catch-22 there. Skype for business, similar to Skype, but it's not Skype. It was Link before, a little bit ago, probably a few years ago. But now it's Skype for Business. Skype for Business is being built on the Skype backbone, although that is now transitioning to Teams. So we'll see how long Skype for Business lasts. At least in the online environment, Microsoft has said that they are going to get rid of it in the online environment and that you'll use Teams instead for your online communication. But it allows for people to see when you're online, the people that are in your list and you're in their list. They can see your presence, which lets them know if you're online, you're busy, whatever. Being able to also have instant messages with those people and being able to have online meetings. So you can turn a chat into an online meeting impromptu, or you can actually send out an official meeting invite with the link in it. And even those that don't have Skype for Business, they just click on the link and they can join the meeting just like WebEx or GoToMeeting. You have Skype for Business, you have SharePoint. For SharePoint, you have a 1 terabyte space that everybody shares. You can go up to 25 terabytes, but it costs an extra 20 cents a gig per month if you need to go over 1 terabyte. 1 terabyte is a pretty good amount of space, but some people might need to go a little bit higher. But I would highly suggest if you're approaching or you are at or past that 1 terabyte space, you might want to look at your data and see if it's an opportunity for you to move some of that data, archive it off into perhaps a low-cost storage environment. You have Office. Depending on your subscription, you would have Office, the full version of Pro or Pro Plus, um, and or the web apps. Now, if you have like an E1, for example, you don't have Office on your desktop. You have the ability to use the web apps. But if you have E3 or E5, you have the full Pro Plus version. For Business Premium, that was the one I was thinking about earlier. Business Premium, you have the Office Pro version. And then one of the other ones, you just have the web apps. OneDrive for Business gives you 1 terabyte of space per person. So each person has their own 1 terabyte of space that belongs to them. Unlike SharePoint, share is the first part of that word. That means that space is shared. Although it's permission-based, you could permission certain parts of it down to a certain subset of people, even down to the item level, although that's not best practice. Your OneDrive, though, everybody has control of their own OneDrive, but there are administrative things that you can do to track what's in a person's OneDrive. So that OneDrive for Business, unlike OneDrive, which is the commercial version, you get 1 terabyte, and there are controls that the administration can have over that individual space because it is a for business account, and it's only accessible through the Office 365 portal, not the same way that OneDrive is accessible. You have the ability to get and use Yammer if you like. Then you have other things also as well that's not on this slide, like Teams and Groups and Planner, things like that. Some of the things that are now being added into the Office 365 environment and are a bit newer, you will have access to depending on your subscription level. But those are the main things that most people have access to. You want to also think about your compliance considerations. Again, if you are a government agency or a government contractor, you do have to be possibly, or I would say you do have to be compliant with FedRAMP and with FSMA, but you may also need to be ITAR and DFARS and NIST compliant. Depending on what kind of work it is that you do, you need to check your contracts and make sure what it is that it's calling for you to be compliant with. Now, Microsoft does boast that their clouds are compliant, and they are in general, but it doesn't mean that you buy one of them and you're automatically compliant. Again, you need to be configured properly, and you need to make sure that you're also on the correct version. So a lot of these ones for NIST and DFARS and ITAR, you need to be on the government or the government contractor version, not on the commercial version of Office 365. There are many different SKUs, and it's very easy for you to get confused. Again, if you're government, make sure you're in the cloud that says government. You might also need to worry about security. So especially if you're government, you might need to do additional things like having a CAT card, which there's better controls for implementing that when you're in the government cloud or government contractor cloud environment or in the DoD environment for Office 365. And then there's other security issues that you could address, like information rights management can help address some of those issues about your users being able to move documents to certain spots, being able to share. Permissions is very important as well. So you want to make sure that you're considering all of that as well. Here's some more details here on this slide. Again, I'll try to make sure that I have those in the notes so that you have them later so that you can go look at some of those details. So that's basically the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. So there's a bunch of different ways you can reach out. The Lady Guinevere handle, the Nakia T. Carter is for LinkedIn. Those are my direct ways for you to get in touch. You can also reach out to us via email at info@c3isit.com, or me directly at ncarter@c3isit.com. Thanks so much, guys. I'm looking forward to recording my next vlog really soon. It'll be next month. All right. Have a